Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I have had a few conversations with people recently, and also people I've spoke with on Zoom, and they often say, when you ask people to message you, connect with you, or even come on the podcast at the end of every single episode, do you really mean it, Neil? And then they look at me confused when I say, of course I do. That is why I do this every day, to give everyone a platform to share their story, how technology can transform their life, their work, industry, even world, and ultimately prove that tech works best when it brings people together, not divide them. So consider this podcast an antidote to all the polarisation we have out there, and share a few good news stories and add a little positivity to the world. So when Gary Chan from Alfrezo messaged me saying, Neil, I love listening to the podcast, could I possibly come on and talk about information security for defence? I said, of course. So today we're going to talk with Gary about why companies should invest in information security for defence, but also how companies that already have invested should be using their security teams as a strategic differentiator in the marketplace. Because let's face it, InfoSec people tend to be highly creative and innovative, yet they are not typically deployed to increase sales or support the business in ways other than defence or risk management. And that feels like a huge missed opportunity to me, and something I'd like to explore today. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to St. Louis so we can speak with Gary Chan. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Well, first of all, I'm very excited to be here. Really enjoy your show, Neil. So thank you for having me. So my name is Gary Chan, and I help companies improve their sales, meet compliance, and stay safe. So I do that by building their information security program or helping out with any other project that needs security. In terms of my educational background, graduated from MIT with a degree in electrical engineering and computer science, and have 4 security certifications. I've helped a number of different organizations, including commercial, nonprofit, and government agencies doing security.
Fantastic. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. And thank you so much for the kind words about the show. It's always nice to have somebody on here that has heard the podcast and has a good feel about what we're doing here, what we're trying to offer people. But for people that are tuning in and hearing about you for the first time, could you possibly tell me a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving for businesses when working with technology?
Sure. Well, there are essentially 2 buckets of things that I help companies with. The first is what I think everyone thinks of, which is improving companies' defenses against hackers, fraudsters, and insider threats. And the second is basically anything innovative around security. So just to give a couple of examples, maybe they want to do a market analysis for building a security product to sell, or using security concepts to achieve outcomes, like, for example, how to bypass spam filters so you can get more marketing emails in people's inboxes.
Love that. And can you tell me a little bit more as well? Because something I was reading before you came on the podcast today was about your belief that companies should, by default, invest in information security for defence. And I think the world of cybersecurity is continuously evolving. But can you tell me a little bit more about that belief?
Sure. Well, I think that there are 2 reasons why businesses really should be investing. The first one, is really more for the CEO and the sales VP. Security actually helps you sell. So if you want to ever sell to one of the big companies or to the government, which is really just one gigantic company, you really have to have some level of security. They'll actually have you fill out like a security questionnaire before they even buy anything from you. And so if you don't have that security there, frankly, you're not going to be selling to them. So you're not going to sell to large companies without any security. And of course, security keeps you safe, right? So we've all heard of places shutting down for a week, sometimes longer, because of ransomware. So whether it's city government, the metro, a regular company, just a recently, different types of hacks, like I think SolarWinds made news. So a lot of different ways in which you could basically go out of business or at least be down for like a week. And how much is that worth to you, right? Not only that, but the damage to your reputation. So I think there's a lot of reasons why, and I think companies understand that, why they need to invest in security. So those are two reasons why. It can help you sell, and it can also help you keep what you have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it was exactly 12 months ago over here in Europe, there was Travelex, and they do all the currency exchanges in all the airports throughout Europe. I'm not sure if they've got a presence in the US or not, but they got hit with a ransomware attack on New Year's Day, and I think they were out of action for 2 months, completely out of action. And of course, now we've been held to ransom by COVID-19 because we can't travel at all, but that's a different story. And I'm curious, though, when we think about cybersecurity, we don't automatically associate it with innovation or different ways of working. So do you have any examples of innovative ways that companies can use security or are using security?
So one example I like to use is email, because people, they use it all the time and it's easy to understand. But understand that there's a whole wide variety of things you can do with security. So in terms of emails, I mentioned briefly, right? So if you can, a lot of marketers will spend a ton of time trying to optimize their emails by writing it in different ways, using specific language, for example, avoiding the word Viagra, so just try to get past those spam filters. But what they miss is a lot of the technical components that security people can bring, which is, well, frankly, those spam filters are all written by security people, right? So they understand, how to get past them. And if you configure your emails in certain ways, it's sort of irrelevant what the marketing guy writes. It increases the probability of your stuff landing in inboxes, 2-3 times, maybe more. I mean, really, the return on investment is just so much greater than you trying to figure out what word to use, right? And then as another example, again, using email, I mean, security people can like search through emails using keywords, or there's actually more analytics behind it. But you can do a lot of different things to look for insider threats, right? The people who are stealing from the company. Maybe they are, taking customer lists and bringing it to a new employer, right? They put in their notice, and then they start downloading data, and then they go to a competitor. That's pretty common, actually. So you can look for that sort of thing, but what if you flip that, right? And you can actually just use the exact same analytics, just start looking for different things. You can look for maybe some employees, not that they're stealing, but that they're unhappy. You can run some analytics and see, okay, I have 1,000 employees and I've got 30 that are unhappy. I can see that list of people. It's just a probability thing, right? I mean, the computer is not perfect. It may not pick up on everyone, but it's going to be pretty decent. And then you can look at that list of 30 people and say, hey, of these 30 people, there's, Jan and Smith, and, these people, I really, really want to keep them. I do not want them leaving. So you can proactively from an HR perspective, start reaching out to these people and say, hey, how are you? Right. I mean, you don't necessarily say, hey, I've been reading your emails, right? Because you haven't, you really haven't. But you can say, hey, what's going on? How can I help you? So on and so forth. And you can help it for employee retention. So those are just a few examples of how you can use security in non-traditional ways to help, do something other than what we typically think of as traditional security.
And I think if we look back to last year, there's been a lot of talk about last year. We don't want to go over that again, but I do think there was a lot of trends and changes in consumer behavior, and not just consumer behavior, I would say in the office or out of the office, wherever you're working, because we've gone from working from home versus working in the office to working from anywhere. There's so many different changes there. But as somebody working right in the heart of the industry here, what kind of trends have you noticed around information security, and how do you expect them to continuously evolve this year?
Sure. Well, we'll start with the obvious, which is COVID that you mentioned. Yeah. So with that, obviously everybody started working from home. Well, that completely changed the landscape. because normally you didn't expect that many people to be working from home. Things weren't optimized that way, and with people working from home, they're using the computer more, which means that they have even more probability of basically going to bad websites. Things that download malware, for example, and then they also now may not be on the corporate firewall because they're not within the four walls of the company's physical office, right? So there's a lot of different things that basically security people have to change. So that was basically one of the huge trends in 2020 was re-optimizing for working from home. But let's move away from COVID. I think everyone's heard enough about that recently. So I would say a couple of things that were really on the way up was artificial intelligence and third-party risk management. So artificial intelligence, I mean, frankly, if you have a hacker that has an AI that works really well, and fortunately that doesn't exist yet, or at least I don't know that it exists yet. I mean, that's going to beat like a team of 100 people. I mean, that thing is going to, just be so smart, and it can work 24/7, work so much faster than any human. So basically, you've got this race between the hackers who are going to be using AI to sort of drive what they're trying to do, and the defense people who are also using AI to drive that. So that's a huge trend. And then the other one that I mentioned was third-party risk management, and we actually see that sort of play out right now with the SolarWinds attack, where it was a supply chain attack where allegedly Russians got into that company, and then that software, because it's deployed into lots of other companies, was the entry point for those hackers into many other companies, including a lot of government agencies here in the U.S. And so third-party risk management is basically managing that risk. Anytime I buy something, let's go ahead and make sure that it's secure, right? Which kind of goes back to the earlier point of, if you want to sell to a big company, this is something they're going to require of you. If you don't have that, they're just not going to buy. So those are kind of the trends: the working from home, the artificial intelligence, and the third-party risk management.
It's incredibly interesting, and a lot of what you said is going to resonate with so many people listening. And presumably, there from what you're talking, I mean, cybersecurity is often likened to a game of cat and mouse and this continuous game of attack versus defend. We have gone from a reactive approach where you wait for something to happen and then react to it, to a more proactive approach now. But presumably, in the future, it's going to be much more of a. It's not necessarily people doing that. It's going to be good AI versus bad AI, right?
Yeah, I think so. That's definitely where one of the ways it's trending. But yeah. I would say that first off, it does take security people to write those AIs, right? So at least I know that I'm not going to be out of a job soon. But secondly, really, those we're really far away from it being completely automated. I mean, humans, they can think through things. They can do so much more that an AI can. I think it'll be many years, if not decades, before it can sort of match. I mean, you've got really clever people thinking of really ingenious ways to trick people, other people to steal or whatever. And some of that stuff really, sometimes is actually done in person, right? So you've got social engineering and things like that. I mean, you're going to notice if a robot walks up to you and starts, trying to social engineer you. A human, doing that is obviously going to trigger a lot fewer thoughts from the other side. So, I think we're pretty far away from that universe, thankfully.
Yeah, there are enough news articles out there exaggerating the capabilities. We don't want to add to that. It is a long way off, but it is food for thought at the same time. But I'm curious, if there is any business leaders or decision makers listening, is there anything that you think they should be monitoring closely and equally leveraging in 2021?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot. Hey Gary, what should we be looking at? And my first thing is, you shouldn't be looking at the latest trends. I mean, because just because someone else is doing it doesn't mean you should be doing it, and because you may not be in the right position for it, or maybe it's a completely different industry, right? So, you need really what you should be doing all the time is looking at security holistically, right? So looking at your company's industry, understanding what the risks are, understanding what legally and regulatorily you are required to do, and then figuring out how much money it actually makes sense to spend, right? If all of your stuff is with public data, then why should you even bother spending any money on there, right? I mean, so and if the most expensive thing that you have is $100, well, don't spend $100 to try to protect it. So it's really just looking at it from a holistic perspective. So if you don't have someone who does that, you need to bring in someone from the outside to do an assessment for you. These things, they're pretty cheap. At least definitely relative to what you could potentially lose. They take a few weeks or whatever for your company, and then you can basically have a prioritized list and say, look, for if you want to invest X $1,000, then you can get this level of protection, so you don't lose Y $1,000, right? And this is the probability of it possibly happening. So now you have a decision to make. You can either accept the risk and know that you might lose that amount in the next 6 months or 5 years or whatever it ends up being, or you can pay for that protection to really minimize that risk. And you can do that for each of those risk factors. And I think that's really the only way to really do it properly, because otherwise you're just chasing trends and you're doing it because someone else is doing it, and that might not get you at all what you're looking for.
Do you have any examples at all that you could possibly share of how you've helped a business? Don't have to name any names there, but just how you've helped a business find ways to either implement a traditional information security program, or equally just found ways to make an existing security program much more strategic and part of the core business.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is really whether or not they're even interested in security. And for that, it's really a conversation with the most senior leaders, whether there's the CEO, CFO, CIO, whoever those people are, just to have a conversation and understand what it is that they're concerned about, right? And I think the news is actually helping the security industry significantly right now, because we do see some of these things about hacks and things like that. Of course, it's been trumped so far by a lot of other things, in the past year. But the point is, I think that there is a lot more awareness now. And so the question is, where does it fall in their priority list? So the fact is that I won't even be there, though, if the executive team hasn't already decided something that they're somewhat interested in, if not very interested in. So that means that they've already opened the door for me. So if I'm there, it means that they're, they want to talk about it, and it is on their priority list. But if you're working for a company that doesn't have it on their list, then you've got the inside track, and you should be talking about it, internally, just to get it on that list. So then that's the hardest part, to be very frank. Then after that, it's essentially what I said before, which is where you're doing an assessment. You look at all the different areas, and it's pretty clear, right? So look, these are the 5 things that you could do to move the needle. They're really going to help your business. Do you want to do it or not? And frankly, when it's at that point in time, they're almost always, going to say yes, right? So, you can lay you can lay out the case once you're in. So that's just the way it typically goes. Then you've got a lot of other sort of what I'll call random projects, which is where they want to do something completely. They want to use security concepts to apply to different things, like the email stuff that I mentioned earlier, like some market analysis, or trying to figure out how to message how their security helps their businesses, or trying to convince their clients that they have sufficient security so that they can sell to a million widgets or something like that. So all of those are pretty specialized and depends upon the actual business.
And throughout your career, have you noticed a real difference from in attitudes and perception from the C-suite? I mean, it is a bit of a cliche, but there's always a cliche that the C-suite didn't see the ROI in security. But do you think that's changing now?
I do. I think that with the news out there, is really just about people's awareness. I mean, nobody thought that COVID would have happened 2 years ago. No, I mean, nobody had on their list of top risk pandemic. So, I think that just the general news cycles talking about that has helped immensely, and because of that, it becomes top of people's minds. What I do find is that when I go to executives and say, hey, there's a 1% chance that this is going to happen and you're going to lose $1 million. They just basically assume it's zero. Right. So I will have the math to sort of show you and say, hey, like in industry, it's usually not 1%, it's usually higher than that. But that is usually this, that, and the other. But I don't go into there and say, hey, it's 1%, 5%, whatever, because they just will assume it's zero. And then so what I do now is I just tell stories, right? I just say, hey, look at these, 5 examples of peer organizations. They do fairly similar things to you, and they were shut down for 3 weeks. They just, oh my God, and now they think it's 100%. And I always try to say, no, it's not really 100%. No, oh my God, that's going to happen. So, but it's really on the presentation style there. So I kind of do both. You've got the math, for the people who want to look at it afterwards. You can actually explain it, but then you tell the story, and the story really drives it. And I think with the news and all the other things has made my job significantly easier, because now they know it's like, it's real.
Yeah, if we've learned anything from the last 12 months, it's expect the unexpected. But could you imagine 2 years ago going into a boardroom and saying, if there was a global pandemic that shut the world down and everyone would have to work from home? It's just
right.
A small percentage. No one would go there, would they?
No, they wouldn't. Not at all.
Like I said earlier, we have talked about this a lot over the last 12 months, but looking forward, what is it that excites you about the opportunities ahead for businesses right now?
Sure. Well, I think as the world becomes more complex, the security needs will grow, right? So, and it grows for everyone. So for an example, self-driving cars, they'll create the need for security oversight that wasn't there previously, right? So, in the past, my car didn't have, it was all fairly mechanical, right? So, but nowadays it's really run by code, and so it creates tremendous opportunity for people to go hack them, right? So imagine if there's a road rage and the guy next to you, rather than like chase you down, like he just like picks up his phone, he flashes it to you in the window, and he presses a couple buttons, and your car like drives into the ditch, right? So I mean, it's I say it funny, it's obviously a terrible thing, but you have all of these jobs that'll get created, out from that. If I have a pacemaker, right? Like, I'm not going to want my spouse who gets angry at me and like presses a button and like all of a sudden I fall over. So, I'm going to be buying, I'm going to be buying a pacemaker from a company that has a reputation for security. And so there's just so many ways in which security is now going to be used and is part of our daily lives. I can use if I were a hacker and I looked at people's usage of Nest, I could figure out when they're, at home. Now it's like 100%, for certain types of workers that are going to be at home, right? But the point is like you can just use technology. There's so much new technology. You can use them in so many different ways that the opportunities to use security as, a differentiator to go sell your product, or if you're a security person to go help make it more secure, they're just getting bigger and bigger every day.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. But before I do let you go, I'm conscious we have covered a lot of ground today. So if anyone would like to find out more information, communicate with you, connect with you, or just find out more about the great work that you're doing, what's the best way of doing that?
Sure. They can just go to my website, alfizo, alfizo.com. And at the bottom, they can use the contact form.
Excellent. Well, I'll add those links to the blog post that will accompany this episode, just to make it easy for them to find you. But I love what you're talking about here, and I think there's also an aspect to this that we don't talk about enough, and that is when we're talking about security, it can often create new streams of revenue or value in other departments that weren't previously there. And I love the work that you're doing here. So a big thank you for coming on and sharing your story with me today.
And thank you for having me, Neil. It's been a real pleasure.
So a big thank you to Gary for not only listening to this podcast, but also for coming on and using the platform to discuss the current landscape and how finding ways to make existing security programs a part of the core business, and even go as far to create new streams of revenue or value in other departments that were previously not there. It's really made me think about things differently. I created this podcast to help bust myself and everyone out of echo chambers, listen to different views and different ways of thinking, and create a platform for people to share that. So, Gary, thank you so much for being a big part of that. For anyone else, wherever you are listening in the world, there's an open invite to you. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. I'm just at Neil C. Hughes. My email is techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk if you'd like to work with me. Or you could just pop by tomorrow, open up your favourite podcast feed, and I should be waiting there with another interview for you. So a genuine thank you from me for you tuning into this podcast, being a big part of the show, and rocking 2021 together. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.